Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. We Should All Be Feminists. Introduction. This is a modified version of a talk I delivered in December 2012 at TED Houston, a yearly conference focused on Africa. Speakers from diverse fields deliver concise talks aimed at challenging and inspiring Africans and friends of Africa. I spoke at a different TED conference a few years ago, giving a talk titled The Danger of the Single Story about how stereotypes limit and shape our thinking, especially about Africa. It seems that stereotypes also limit the word feminist and the idea of feminism itself. When my brother Chuck's and best friend Ike, co-organizers of the TEDx Houston conference, insisted that I speak, I could not say no. I decided to speak about feminism because I strongly feel about it. I suspected it might not be a trendy subject, but I wanted to start a conversation. And so that evening, as I stood on stage, I felt as though I was in the presence of family, a kind and attentive audience, but one that might resist the subject of my talk. In the end, their standing ovation gave me hope. We should all be feminists. Okoloma was one of my most fabulous childhood friends. He lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother. I would ask Okoloma's opinion if I liked a boy. Okoloma was funny and intelligent and wore pointy cowboy boots at the tips. In December 2005, in a plane crash in southern Nigeria, Okoloma died. It is still hard for me to put into words how I felt. Okoloma was someone I could argue with, laugh with, and honestly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were in his house, arguing, both of us bristling with half-baked knowledge from the books we had read. I do not remember what this particular argument was about. However, I remember that as I argued and argued, Okoloma looked at me and said, "You know, you are a feminist." It was not a compliment. I could tell from his tone, the same tone with which a person would say, "You are a supporter of terrorism." I did not know exactly what the word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I didn't know, so I brushed it aside and continued to argue. The first thing I planned to do when I got home was look up the word in the dictionary. Now fast forward to some years later. In 2003, I wrote a novel called Purple Hibiscus about a man who beats his wife and whose story doesn't end well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. Nigerians, as you might know, are very quick to give unsolicited advice. He told me that people were saying my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist since feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Then, an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was UN African, and that I was only calling myself a feminist because I had been influenced by Western books. This amused me because much of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. I must have read every single Mills and Boon romance published before I was 16. Moreover, each time I try to read those books called classic feminist texts, I get bored, and I struggle to finish them. Anyway, since feminism was UN African, I decided I would now call myself a happy African feminist. Then, a dear friend told me that calling myself a feminist meant that I hated men. So, I decided to be a happy African feminist who does not hate men. At some point, I was a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men. Of course, much of this was tongue-in-cheek, but what it shows is how the word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, you think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry, you don't have a sense of humor, you don't use deodorant. Now, here's a story from my childhood. When I was in primary school in Nsukka, a university town in southeastern Nigeria, my teacher said at the beginning of the term that she would give the class a test and whoever got the highest score would be the class monitor. The class monitor was a big deal. If you were class monitor, you would write down the names of noisemakers each day, which was heady enough power on its own, but my teacher would also give you a cane to hold in your hand while you walked around and patrolled the class for noisemakers. Of course, you were not allowed to use the cane. But it was an exciting prospect for the 9-year-old me. I very much wanted to be a class monitor. And I got the highest score on the test. Then, to my surprise, my teacher said the monitor had to be a boy. She had forgotten to clarify that earlier. She assumed it was obvious. A boy had the second highest score on the test, and he would be the monitor. Even more interesting was that this boy was a sweet, gentle soul with no interest in patrolling the class with a stick. At the same time, I was full of ambition to do so. But I was female, and he was male, and he became the class monitor. I have never forgotten that incident. If we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. If we see the same thing over and over again, it becomes normal. If only boys were made class monitors, then at some point, we would all think, even if unconsciously, that the class monitor would have to be a boy. If we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it starts to seem unnatural that only men should be heads of corporations. I often make the mistake of thinking something evident to me is just as apparent to everyone else. Take my dear friend Louis, who is a brilliant, progressive man. We would have conversations and he would tell me, I don't see what you mean by things being different and harder for women. Maybe it was so in the past, but not now. Everything is fine now for women. I didn't understand how Louis could not see what seemed so evident. I love being back home in Nigeria, and I spend much of my time there in Lagos, the country's largest city and commercial hub. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the heat goes down and the city has a slower pace, I go out with friends and family to restaurants or cafes. On one of those evenings, Louis and I were out with friends. There is a beautiful fixture in Lagos, a sprinkling of energetic young men who hang around outside certain establishments and dramatically help you park your car. Lagos is a metropolis of almost 20 million people, with more energy than London and a more entrepreneurial spirit than New York. So people come up with all sorts of ways to make a living. As in most big cities, finding parking in the evenings can be difficult, so these young men make a business out of finding spots and, even when there are spots available, of guiding you into yours with much gesticulating and promising to look after your car until you get back. I was impressed with the particular theatrics of the man who found us a parking spot that evening. As we left, I decided to give him a tip. I opened my bag, put my hand inside it to get my money, and gave it to the man. And he, this happy and grateful man, took the money from me and then looked across at Louis and said, "Thank you, sir." Louis looked at me, surprised, and asked, "Why is he thanking me?" I didn't give him the money. Then I saw realization dawn on Louis's face. The man believed that whatever money I had ultimately came from Louis. Because Louis is a man. Men and women are different. We have different hormones, different sexual organs, and different biological abilities. Women can have babies, men cannot. Men have more testosterone and are generally physically stronger than women. There are slightly more women than men in the world. 52% of the world's population is female, but most of the positions of power and prestige are occupied by men. The late Kenyan Nobel Peace Laureate Wangari Maathai put it simply and well when she said, "The higher you go, the fewer women there are." During the recent US elections, we kept hearing of the Lilly Ledbetter law. If we go beyond that nicely alliterative name, it was really about this. In the US, a man and a woman are doing the same job with the same qualifications, and the man is paid more because he is a man. So, in a literal way, men rule the world. This made sense 1,000 years ago. Because human beings lived then in a world in which physical strength was the most important attribute for survival, the physically stronger person was more likely to lead. And men, in general, are physically stronger. There are, of course, many exceptions. Today, we live in a vastly different world. The person more qualified to lead is not the physically stronger person. It is the more intelligent, the more knowledgeable, the more creative, more innovative. And there are no hormones for those attributes. A man is as likely as a woman to be intelligent, innovative, and creative. We have evolved. But our ideas of gender have not evolved very much. Not long ago, I walked into the lobby of one of the best Nigerian hotels, and a guard at the entrance stopped me and asked me annoying questions. What was the name and room number of the person I was visiting? Did I know this person? Could I prove I was a hotel guest by showing him my key card? Because the automatic assumption is that a Nigerian female walking into a hotel alone is a sex worker. Because a Nigerian female alone cannot possibly be a guest paying for her room. A man who walks into the same hotel is not harassed. The assumption is that he is there for something legitimate. Why, by the way, do those hotels not focus on the demand for sex workers instead of on the ostensible supply? I cannot go alone to many reputable clubs and bars in Lagos. They just don't let you in if you are a woman alone. A man must accompany you. So I have male friends who arrive at clubs and end up going in with their arms linked with those of a complete stranger because that complete stranger, a woman out on her own, had no choice but to ask for help to get into the club. Each time I walk into a Nigerian restaurant with a man, the waiter greets the man and ignores me. The waiters are products of a society that has taught them that men are more important than women, and I know that they don't intend harm, but it is one thing to know something intellectually and quite another to feel it emotionally. Each time they ignore me, I feel invisible. I feel upset. I want to tell them that one is just as human as the man and worthy of acknowledgement. These are little things, but sometimes they are the little things that sting the most. Not long ago, I wrote an article about being young and female in Lagos. And an acquaintance told me that it was an angry article and that I should not have made it so angry. But I was unapologetic. Of course, it was angry. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. I am angry, we should all be angry, and anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. But I am also hopeful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to remake themselves for the better. But back to anger. I heard the caution in the acquaintance's tone, and I knew that the comment was as much about the article as it was about my character. Anger, the tone said, is particularly not good for a woman. If you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. I have a friend, an American woman, who took over a managerial position from a man. Her predecessor had been considered a tough go-getter. He was blunt and hard-charging and particularly strict about signing time sheets. She took on her new job and imagined herself equally challenging, but perhaps a little kinder than him. He didn't always realize that people had families, she said, and she did. Only weeks into her new job, she disciplined an employee about a forgery on a timesheet, just as her predecessor would have done. The employee then complained to top management about her style. She was aggressive and difficult to work with, the employee said. Other employees agreed. One said they had expected she would bring a woman's touch to her job, but she hadn't. It didn't occur to them that she was doing the same thing for which a man had been praised. I have another friend, an American woman, who has a high-paying job in advertising. She is one of 2 women in her team. Once, at a meeting, she said she had felt slighted by her boss, who ignored her comments and praised something similar when it came from a man. She wanted to speak up, to challenge her boss. But she didn't. Instead, after the meeting, she went to the bathroom and cried, then called me to vent. She didn't want to speak up because she didn't want to seem aggressive. She let her resentment simmer. What struck me, with her and with many other female American friends I have, is how invested they are in being liked. They have been raised to believe that being likable is very important and that this likable trait is a specific thing. And that specific thing does not include showing anger, being aggressive, or disagreeing too loudly. We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them. But the reverse is not the case. We don't teach boys to care about being likable. We spend too much time telling girls that they cannot be angry or aggressive or harsh, which is bad enough, but then we turn around and either praise or excuse men for the same reasons. There are so many magazine articles and books all over the world telling women what to do, how to be and not to be, to attract or please men. There are far fewer guides for men about pleasing women. I teach a writing workshop in Lagos, and one of the participants, a young woman, told me that a friend had told her not to listen to my feminist talk, otherwise she would absorb ideas that would destroy her marriage. This is a threat, the destruction of a marriage, the possibility of not having a marriage at all, that in our society is much more likely to be used against a woman than against a man. Gender matters everywhere in the world. And I would like to ask today if we should begin to dream about and plan for a different world. A fairer world. A world of happier men and happier women who are more accurate to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a complex, small cage, and we put boys inside this cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear, weakness, and vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves because they have to be, in Nigerian speak, a hard man. In secondary school, boys and girls go out, and both are teenagers with meager pocket money. Yet the boy is expected to pay the bills, always, to prove his masculinity. And we wonder why boys are more likely to steal money from their parents. What if boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity and money? What if their attitude was not that the boy has to pay, but rather, whoever has more should pay? Of course, because of their historical advantage, most men will have more today. But if we start raising children differently, then in 50 years, in 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of proving their masculinity by material means. But by far, the worst thing we do to males, by making them feel they have to be complicated, is that we leave them with very fragile egos. The more complex a man feels compelled to be, the weaker his ego becomes. And then we do a much more tremendous disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of males. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We tell girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful, otherwise you will threaten the man. If you are the breadwinner in your relationship with a man, pretend that you are not, especially in public. Otherwise, you will emasculate him. But what if we question the premise itself? Why should a woman's success be a threat to a man? What if we decide to simply dispose of that word, and I don't know if there is an English word I dislike more than this, emasculation. A Nigerian acquaintance once asked me if I was worried that men would be intimidated by me. I was not worried at all. It had not even occurred to me to be worried because a man who would be intimidated by me is exactly the kind of man I would have no interest in. Still, I was struck by this. Because I am female, I'm expected to aspire to marriage. I am expected to always make my life choices, keeping in mind that marriage is the most important. Marriage can be a good thing, a source of joy, love, and mutual support. But why do we teach girls to aspire to marriage, yet we don't teach boys to do the same? I know a Nigerian woman who decided to sell her house because she didn't want to intimidate a man who might want to marry her. I know an unmarried woman in Nigeria who wears a wedding ring when she goes to conferences because she wants her colleagues to, according to her, give her respect. The sadness is that a wedding ring automatically makes her seem worthy of respect, while not wearing one would make her easily dismissible, and this is in a modern workplace. I know young women who are under so much pressure, from family, from friends, even from work, to get married that they are pushed to make terrible choices. Our society teaches a woman at a certain age who is unmarried to see it as a profound personal failure. Meanwhile, a man who is unmarried at a certain age has not quite come around to making his pick. It is easy to say, but women can just say no to all this. But the reality is more complicated and more complex. We are all social beings. We internalize ideas from our socialization. Even our language illustrates this. Marriage is often a language of ownership, not of partnership. We use the word respect for something a woman shows a man, but not often for something a man shows a woman. Both men and women will say, I did it for peace in my marriage. When men say it, it is usually about something they should not do anyway. Something they say to their friends in a fondly exasperated way, something that ultimately proves their masculinity. Oh, my wife said I can't go to clubs every night, so now, for peace in my marriage, I go only on weekends. When women say, I did it for peace in my marriage, it is usually because they have given up a job, a career goal, or a dream. We teach females that in relationships, compromise is what a woman is more likely to do. We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or accomplishments, which, in my opinion, can be a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the way boys are. If we have sons, we don't mind knowing about their girlfriends. But our daughters' boyfriends? God forbid. But we expect them to bring home the perfect man for marriage when the time is right. We police girls. We praise girls for virginity, but we don't praise boys for virginity, and it makes me wonder how exactly this is supposed to work out, since the loss of virginity is a process that usually involves two people of opposite genders. Recently, a young woman was gang-raped in a university in Nigeria, and the response of many young Nigerians, both male and female, was something like this: yes, rape is wrong, but what is a girl doing in a room with 4 boys? Let us forget that response is horrible inhumanity if we can. These Nigerians have been raised to think of women as inherently guilty. And they have been raised to expect so little of men that the idea of men as savage beings with no self-control is somehow acceptable. We teach girls to shame. Close your legs. Cover yourself. We make them feel as though, by being born female, they are already guilty of something. And so girls grow up to be women who cannot say they have desire. Who silence themselves. Who cannot say what they honestly think. Who has turned pretense into an art form. I know a woman who hates domestic work, but she pretends that she likes it because she has been taught that to be good wife material, she has to be, to use that Nigerian word, homely. And then she got married. And her husband's family began to complain that she had changed. She had not changed. She just got tired of pretending to be what she was not. The problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. Imagine how much happier we would be and how much more accessible it would be to be our true individual selves if we didn't weigh gender expectations. Boys and girls are undeniably different biologically, but socialization exaggerates the differences and then starts a self-fulfilling process. Take cooking, for example. Today, women, in general, are more likely to do housework than men, cooking and cleaning. But why is that? Is it because women are born with a cooking gene, or because, over the years, they have been socialized to see cooking as their role? I was going to say that perhaps women are born with a cooking gene until I remembered that most famous cooks in the world, who are given the fancy title of chef, are men. I used to look at my grandmother, a brilliant woman, and wonder what she would have been if she'd had the same opportunities as men during her youth. Today, there are more opportunities for women than there were during my grandmother's time because of important changes in policy and law. But what matters even more is our attitude and our mindset. What if, in raising children, we focus on ability instead of gender? What if we focus on interest instead of gender? I know a family with a son and a daughter who are a year apart in age and are both brilliant at school. When the boy is hungry, the parents tell the girl, "Go and cook Indomie noodles for your brother." The girl doesn't like cooking Indomie noodles, but she is a girl and has to. What if the parents, from the beginning, taught both children to cook them? Cooking, by the way, is a useful and practical life skill for a boy to have. I've never thought it made much sense to leave such a crucial thing, the ability to nourish oneself, in the hands of others. I know a woman with the same degree and job as her husband. When they get back from work, she does most of the housework, which is valid for many marriages, but what struck me was that whenever he changed the baby's nappy, she thanked him. What if she saw it as something normal and natural, that he should help care for his child? I am trying to unlearn many lessons of gender I internalized while growing up. But I sometimes still feel vulnerable in the face of gender expectations. I was worried the first time I taught a writing class in graduate school. It was not about the teaching material because I was well prepared and teaching what I enjoyed. Instead, I was worried about what to wear. I wanted to be taken seriously. I knew that I would automatically have to prove my worth because I was female. And I was worried that I would not be taken seriously if I looked too feminine. I wanted to wear my shiny lip gloss and girly skirt, but I decided not to. I wore a very serious, very manly and hideous suit. The sad truth is that when it comes to appearance, we start with men as the norm. Many of us think that the less feminine a woman appears, the more likely she is to be taken seriously. A man going to a business meeting doesn't wonder about being taken seriously based on what he is wearing, but a woman does. I wish I had not worn that ugly suit that day. Had I had the confidence to be myself then, my students would have benefited even more from my teaching. I would have been more comfortable and more fully and truly myself. I have chosen to no longer be apologetic for my femininity. And I want to be respected in all my femaleness. Because I deserve to be. I like politics and history and am happy when I have a good argument about ideas. I am girly. I am happily girly. I like high heels and trying on lipstick. It's nice to be complimented by both men and women, although I have to be honest and say that I prefer the compliments of stylish women, but I often wear clothes that men don't like or don't understand. I wear them because I like them and because I feel good in them. The male gaze, as a shaper of my life's choices, is largely incidental. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. It makes people uncomfortable, sometimes even irritable. Both men and women are resistant to talk about gender or are quick to dismiss the problems of gender. Because thinking of changing the status quo is always uncomfortable. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say you believe in human rights or something like that? Because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who have, for centuries, been excluded. It would be a way of denying that the problem of gender targets women. The problem was not about being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then excluded and oppressed one group. It is only fair that the solution to the problem should acknowledge that. Some men feel threatened by the idea of feminism. This comes, I think, from the insecurity triggered by how boys are brought up, how their sense of self-worth is diminished if they are not naturally in charge as men. Other men might say, okay, this is interesting, but I don't think like that. I don't even think about gender. Maybe not. And that is part of the problem. Many men do not actively think about gender or notice gender. Many men say, like my friend Louis did, that things might have been bad in the past, but everything is fine now. And that many men do nothing to change it. If you are a man and you walk into a restaurant and the waiter greets just you, does it occur to ask the waiter, why have you not greeted her? Men need to speak out in all of these ostensibly small situations. Because gender can be uncomfortable, there are easy ways to close this conversation. Some people will bring up evolutionary biology and apes, how female apes bow to male apes, and other such things. But the point is this, we are not apes. Apes also live in trees and eat earthworms, but we do not. Some people will say, well, poor men also have a hard time. And they do. But that is not what this conversation is about. Gender and class are different. Poor men still have the privileges of being men, even if they do not have the privileges of being wealthy. I learned a lot about systems of oppression and how they can be blind to one another by talking to black men. I was once talking about gender, and a man said to me, why does it have to be you as a woman? Why not you as a human being? This type of question is a way of silencing a person's specific experiences. Of course, I am a human being, but particular things happen to me because I am a woman. This same man, by the way, would often talk about his experience as a black man. To which I should probably have responded, why not your experiences as a man or as a human being? Why a black man? So, no, this conversation is about gender. Some will say, oh, but women have the real power, bottom power. This is a Nigerian expression for a woman who uses her sexuality to get things from men. However, bottom power is not power at all because the woman with bottom power is not robust, she just has a good route to tap another person's power. And then what happens if the man is in a lousy mood, CK, or temporarily impotent? Some people will say a woman is subordinate to men because it's our culture. But culture is constantly changing. I have 15 beautiful twin nieces. If they had been born 100 years ago, they would have been taken away and killed. Because 100 years ago, Igbo culture considered the birth of twins to be an evil omen. Today, that practice is unimaginable to all Igbo people. What is the point of culture? Culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people. In my family, I am the child who is most interested in the story of who we are, our ancestral lands, and our traditions. My brothers are not as interested as I am. But I cannot participate because Igbo culture privileges men, and only the male members of the extended family can attend the meetings where major family decisions are taken. So although I am the one who is most interested in these things, I cannot attend the meeting. I cannot have a formal say because I am female. Culture does not make people, people make culture. If the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we can and must make it our culture. I think very often of my friend Okoloma. May he and others who passed away in that Sosolizo crash continue to rest in peace. He will always be remembered by those of us who loved him. And he was right, that day, many years ago, when he called me a feminist. I am a feminist. When I looked the word up in the dictionary all those years ago, it said, feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. My great-grandmother, from stories I've heard, was a feminist. She ran away from the house of the man she did not want to marry and married the man of her choice. She refused, protested, and spoke up whenever she felt she was being deprived of land and access because she was female. She did not know the word feminist. But it doesn't mean she wasn't one. More of us should reclaim that word. The best feminist I know is my brother Keen, a kind, good-looking, and very masculine young man. My definition of a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it, we must do better. All of us, women and men, must do better. About the author. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie grew up in Nigeria. Her work has been translated into 30 languages and has appeared in various publications, including The New Yorker, Granta, the O. Henry Prize Stories, The Financial Times, and Zoetrope, All Story. She is the author of the novels Purple Hibiscus, which won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Hurston's Wright Legacy Award, Half of a Yellow Sun, which won the Orange Prize and was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist, a New York Times Notable Book, and a People and Black Issues Book Review Best Book of the Year, and Americana, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was a New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, and Entertainment Weekly Best Book of the Year, and the story collection The Thing Around Your Neck. A recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship, she divides her time between the United States and Nigeria.